Okay, now the next thing I want to do is add some foam on my beach and on the surface of the water too. The color that I want to use for that is my reflection color plus white, because I don't want the foam to be the brightest thing in the picture, so obviously if I made it pure white, it would be the brightest thing in there. So I also want it to be visible on all of this water here, and if I make it if I make it the same color as the rest of my reflection, then I'm not going to see it very much here. So I'm going to add white to my reflection color in order to put it in between my bright white and my existing reflection. You know, foam gets its white color from reflecting. You know, it's just millions of little bubbles reflecting the light. So it is the water reflecting the light, and then whatever, you know, a lot of times it's discolored because of whatever impurities are in the water. So we're gonna try to make this look like a very pure water scene. We want happy tropical scene, not yellow foam. Anyway, I'm adding white to this existing foam color, and whatever color, you know, the reason I explain all the reasoning behind it is because whatever color you use, you can gauge the color that you use for the sea foam based on those things, you know, somewhere in between your brightest whites and your established reflection color. We'll just keep it looking in balance and natural with the picture that you've already made. Okay, now this is going to look like pure white when I first put it on this canvas, but it's going to dry, and then it won't look like pure white. It'll darken a little bit. Okay, now you can see I've dipped the brush just like I've been doing, and sorry, I got distracted by a little paint booger right here. Just the corner in there. You know, this is the part of the brush that I use most of the time. I like to kind of draw my picture a lot of the time when I'm doing the details, so that long point of the brush works best. So you can see I dipped not just the entire front end of the bristles, but the pointed longest end of the bristles. That's how I use these angled brushes. I'm using a smaller brush than I did. That's not because I need a smaller brush, it's just because I lost the first one. I don't know where I put it. So the couple of them came in the same pack, and so I just grabbed the littler one since I'm on details anyway. But you could definitely just use the same brush that everything else was done with. So all I did here was I just have a habit of kind of sharpening my bristles. You know, you can see me dragging this back like I'm sharpening a knife, kind of, and it squishes the paint into the bristles. So now you definitely see that paint has covered more of the bristles, yet when I dip, I'm still going to be dipping just that longest point in the paint. I wanted that to be really clear because it makes things more controllable, and you can't see what I dipped. I just now dipped it again, and you can't see it once I do this. But that's, just so you know, that's what I'm always doing in order to maintain control of my brush. So to do this foam, I want to put a very particular kind of shape in perspective. I'm going to have little squiggles that are going slightly more vertical. So let's say that this is just a little section of foam that's drifting down the face of this wave, and then when it goes to the back side of the wave, I just want some kind, it doesn't matter what direction, but some kind of a visible bend in a different direction that's a little more horizontal. So you see that shape I made, that's more horizontal, and then when I get to the next face, I'll go more vertical. Now it can just be a tiny bit. I really don't want to put long shapes going this way, because it represents so much distance, just like I've talked about before. So this is more squished along this reflection area, and then this one becomes more vertical. Now with these little sections of foam, what you have is wherever there's any kind of a little corner on this, I'll want to kind of stretch that out so that I can attach it. So that's why I made this little point coming off, and I made this little point here. We'll make it go a little bit further. It doesn't have to be a sharp point because, you know, I think that the surface tension of water rounds all edges, but I do want to stretch it out and put it pointing in another shape so that when I make another shape, so I'll make another one here, we'll go more vertical here, and we'll go the other way and then bend it over here and point it to this. So points point to points. That's a funny way to say that, isn't it? So wherever I have little corners or ends, I'll have them pointing toward another corner or end of another piece of foam. Now this one, maybe I'll bend it this way again and go along the top of this, and then maybe come down here like that. All right, let's try a little bit more. So I'm going to put a little point pointing at that one, and then zigzag a little bit like this. So that one's just right there on that reflection area. And then this one, you know, I'll put another one. I'm going to round this too. See that sharp zigzag? I don't want that. There. See, I kind of rounded that shape to make it just have more of an organic feel. Now I'll do another one here, like this, and maybe another one in here. See, now even though that's just a tiny little bump coming off, it's still a place where I can put another shape pointing at that. And get more of my color in my brush. I can put little dots in between to kind of connect them. You know, in the end, the goal is that, here, let's just connect that together. If something looks funny, then, well, before I do that, you know, maybe I'll just keep going. You know, if any of these shapes start looking unnatural, then I'll maybe merge some together. I mean, I always adjust everything in the end. I get started by some certain method and then end up adjusting as I go, but let's get a little further. Okay, same thing. I'm going to put shapes that are more stretched out on the back side, like this. And look, those are just little shapes, you know. I just want to be careful not to make the exact same shape too many times in a row. Notice how little and how short I can make a lot of these. I don't need a whole bunch of real long squiggles. That's something I did in earlier paintings before I had noticed that so often by the time this foam gets all broken up, it's in a lot of shorter shapes rather than real long continuous squiggly shapes, you know. So here you can see I stopped this shape, made another one, but I've got a point pointing to a point. Foam pulls apart after it's, you know, it's like a complete blanket when it first churns up, but then it pulls apart, and that's why it leaves these points, because in the negative space in between, these roundish shapes where the air bubbles have pushed it apart are what is left behind. Let's put a little dot in between here, just because that kind of helps to point this one to this one. Again, here I'm kind of on the face of a wave. I'm going to go down and then sideways more right here, and then down more again right here. And then maybe make a few dots pointing to another place. Now here in the foreground, you know, I have a lot more. You can see I've got patterns that are coming down vertically. I want to watch out for not putting anything stacked too consistently in a row. So this 1, 2, 3 is as far as I want to go with that. And so here, let's just connect this little guy, turn it into one piece. See, that's what I was talking about. You know, it's easier just to adjust sometimes than to try to get things just right the first time. As I get higher in this picture, I really want to squish things, and I mean just, you know, a little bit higher. I want to immediately start changing these shapes to be more squished. I just want to stress the shortness of these little shapes. You can see me just laying the corner of the brush down at kind of a sideways angle. Just using it like a pen. What really gives the foam its look is that consistency of points pointing to points, but the points are rounded a lot of the time. They don't have to be all pointy. I think when you have real large sections stretching up on a wave, that's when you get the long stretchy strands. You definitely see that, but it's on a large scale, not a small scale. So this is a good thing to understand too. You know, if I'm staging this picture from, you know, we're looking this way, then as I look this way, I want the angles to be more like this, because the way the perspective changes if I turn my head. So it'll look, the perspective again will look better if what I'm calling my most vertical angles in my pattern changes over here to be uniformly more tilted this way instead of straight up and down. So my most straight up and down angles will be in the middle. And then in order to very subtly create a feel of a vanishing point in this picture, then I'll make my average angle, see how these are dot, 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 they're going that way. I don't want them in such a line like that, but you can see that my average angle, even though I have one breaking that pattern, that's fine, but I'm going to have more that are facing this way on the left side. I'll have more that are facing this way on the right side. So you can see as I progress how I do that. Now what I also want in here is, I think I want to put a lot more of this sea foam in the front of the picture. So I'll put really big clumps of it. Sometimes you know, that scribbly movement that you see me doing is just to kind of find a shape. I'm scribbling not to get that scribbly texture, but just to try to take away my natural tendency to form the shape from scratch. You know, if I just scribble a little bit, then maybe something more random looking will take shape, and then when I see it, I'll adjust it by making it have those points that point to other points. And so I'm just closing in closing in these shapes a little bit more. So you'll see me connecting these together. It's not really a stroke, the technique I'm using on the brush. You know, I just bend the point against the surface and move slow enough that it doesn't have a streaky look to it. Right now here I'm just elongating the different points that I see on these shapes. I'm stretching them out toward other, not just in any direction, but toward other pieces. See, I see this one right here, these over here. I'm not sure which one I want to go to, so I'm just gonna leave that one alone. But here I can close this in more. So down in here, I'm going to put that a little bit of just a slight wall of foam with a little shadow under it, like it's just barely tumbling forward still from the previous wave. I don't think that would actually happen. I don't know if you'd have waves that close together in real life, but it looks pretty. So I'm going to put that foam in here. Bring that down. I want to put more of my sand and underwater color in here, so I'm just going to pretend like it is there still while I paint this lower area. Okay, let's do a little bit more in here. See here, that angle is not going this way, but I'm going to make a lot of them going that way. It'll look weird if all of them do. Notice how I'm doing so many little dots. You know, I want to make sure that I have those little connecting dots in there, just because, you know, if I have a whole bunch of the same kind of shape, it really looks unnatural. So I want to try to put every size so it looks diverse. Now to me, this perspective still looks a little bit straight down and not out, so to try to change the feel of that, I'm just going to try to take some of these shapes and maybe zigzag them a little bit. Just less of those vertical looking angles. Just put another point coming off this little shape and then stretch it this way. You know, I'm just putting a lot more shapes going sideways rather than up and down. So another strategy for this might be to just make a bunch of little short shapes, you know, not long stretched out shapes. And then, you know, if it gives my imagination something to work with, I'll just maybe drag my brush a little bit more downward when I'm on the face of a wave, a little more sideways when I'm on the back of a wave, the reflection part. And then when I have something to look at, then, you know, I might imagine some little connections there. So let me just zigzag this one and go like this, connect those two like this. Just a different strategy for the same look. Make little shapes and then start finding ways to point them at each other. I don't want to forget that I'm trying to put more of my angles pointing, slanting down to the left. And I know I've said this a million times before, but I got to say it again. I don't want to automatically go to my empty space to put new shapes in. You know, that's what makes a picture look real systematic. I'm purposely closing in all the shapes more as I come up here because this is just going to be solid. So I'm trying to gradually get to where it's solid. What happens is before the foam splits apart, it just has kind of circle-ish shapes where the bubbles are starting to push it apart, but there's no points because everything's connected. So I'll come into this very foreground foam and paint the negative space rather because it's less work. Still just connecting little shapes together. Now let's do some kind of floating off the picture here. Now I do have a very even dispersion of this right now that I would like to make feel a little bit less even, more random. So I'm going to go to the more dense areas and make them more dense and stay off of the areas that are less. Now in order to visualize more of this picture, I'm going to start doing this foam in the foreground. So I'm going to need a shadow color. Put this right in here. I don't know if it'll work to use this, you know, there's this deep watercolor I used out here, but I think that might be more turquoise than I want to go on the shadow of this foam, you see. So what I want something is a little more violet. So to accomplish that, I think what I'll do is just mix a little bit of this Theo Violet with that. And this is just a small task here, so I'm just going to put that paint right on my canvas. I only need the tiniest amount of it, not a lot at all, so just grab a little dot of that color. And if you have a French ultramarine blue, then that's really the kind of color that I just now made. I use that color all the time for this, when I'm working with oils, for this kind of application, to make any kind of snow or foam or cloud shadows. French ultramarine works real good for that. Now I'm going to break this apart still with more shapes and negative space, but for now I'm just making a big clump of foam rolling in. Kind of connect it with my other shapes that are on there. I like that color, it's pretty. Now if I put enough shadow on there, then I can give it the look of some of this foam kind of shooting out. Just like I did the wave, same thing up on the wave. You know, I just make the, I'm just making splotches of shadow, and then when I come back and do the light color, I'll just put little dots of that lighter white foam color and then blend it back into the rest. Right, that's good. So I'll take this same foam color I've been using and go to this, you know, it would be kind of the right side because I've got it moving to the right of a bright area, and then just blend that way. Then make sure it's only that very end of the shape that has much of an edge on it, because I want it all to look real soft and blended together. Likewise, I can take any shadows and blend those the other way. Take the shadows and move them that way, because they're opposite. Then I can make the reflection of that foam right here on the sand. Watch this. This is my dirt color that I've been using. I'm going to bring it right up to there. Just put it right up against that foam. And then I'm going to take my underwater color, because that's how I made this shadow. I'm going to take this Theo Violet, my same shadow color, and just blend it into the sand where it meets the foam. Make a shadow. And just blend it down. And then this is the fun part. I make a reflection of the foam in that shadow just by trying to mirror some of my foam like this, making the bright white areas doesn't need to match so exactly. Just a little suggestion there. I'm just kind of blending, making this line not quite as sharp, just kind of softening that line in between the sand and the foam. You know, I think it'll look better if I just kind of add a little bit of my blue to all of the sands, because it's got kind of a reddish color, so I'm just adding that underwater color to it again, maybe a little of this. Same thing I did in that shadow just now. It's wet sand and it's reflecting the sky just like the rest of this picture, so I'm gonna just add that blue and violet in there. Then get more of my foam color. I think it would look good if I had just a little more of that bluish color in there too. I'm just gonna do a little bit more of the foam, a little bit less of the sand here for the reflection. Let's get that underwater color. Alright, that's the look I'm going for. I'll leave it at that. I can come in here, do the same thing. Foam color, I'll put the shadow in there next. See, if I bring both the reflection and the foam to the same line, then that line will get obscured because it's the same color. Do a little bit of this foam while I'm at it. Makes a great shadow color. I like this. This is the first time I've mixed a turquoise with a magenta to get a shadow color like this. But the result is the same as probably just mixing a little bit of black with the phthalo blue, or just using French ultramarine, which I just don't have. I wouldn't want to buy a tube just for just for this one little part when I can mix it, but it is really handy to have around if you're going to do a lot of this kind of color theme. I just want to make it look like little sections of foam are flying forward, flying at me, so that's why the more roundish shapes on this left side. Now this still doesn't have the real three-dimensional perspective that I want on it, and I think a lot of the reason is that I have still a lot of shapes that continue far vertically, but not as many shapes that continue for a long way horizontally. So I'm going to start chopping these shapes in half and just painting the negative space. So now I'm just going to paint little blobs of this sand color in there in order to break these apart. You can see that, you know, this shape, for instance, goes from here all the way to here, and that's nice that it curves sideways, but I just don't have that many shapes that go, you know, this far sideways. So really, if this is in perspective this way, there should be more shapes going side to side and less shapes going up and down. So in order to give that feel more, I'm just going to start breaking some of my longer shapes in half. As I was adding more of my long shapes, my horizontal shapes, I was adding more in, but then it was just getting to be more seafoam than I really want to put in the picture. I don't want to just close it all in. So now I'm going to get rid of some, and I end up doing that a lot, going back and forth from the negative space to the positive space, negative space. Negative space just means the space in between the object that you're painting. Positive space is just painting the object. At least that's the way I have taken it. Okay, so I'm just pre-mixing my color. I put a little bit of my underwater color with my sand color to try to match this. That'll be a good enough match. And I'm going to do just exactly what I said. Now I'll put this color wherever I can break these shapes apart. We'll put a little strip here. It doesn't have to be real big things, real big sections. The idea is just to get enough in there that they look broken apart. And I think, you know, it might be surprising what differences just tiny little divides can make. Okay, here's a big area. So I was explaining how the foam gets pushed apart by the water as it's bubbling up. So for the most part, I'm making kind of oval shapes. Just doing, you know, strokes sideways that have blunt ends on the brush strokes. I'm not really tapering them out to a point so much. Put a little bit more of this watercolor in there. There we go. I think that'll match better. Let's cut this one in half. Same here. And see, I can also just leave little holes in my foam shapes, you know, up in here. I might just put some little patches of the dirt color showing through. We'll see what that looks like when it dries. Sometimes you get better oval shapes if you're using one of these angled brushes with the longer point, pulling it against that point like this can leave rounder shapes. Feels more like drawing when I do that. course, I don't want just a bunch of ovals, so I'll connect a bunch together. You know, I'll try to scramble it up enough that it doesn't just look like a bunch of circle shapes. And then if this still looks weird when I'm done, then I'll come back and do more of the foam color. And I'm okay with that because I know that I don't have a perfect enough understanding of how to make these shapes to just do it exactly how I would like to see it the first time without any error, for lack of a better word. And so I'm okay with just doing some trial and error. And I find that going back and forth from the foam to the space in between the foam is a real good method for gradually getting it to likable shapes. There we go. I think doing these little patches is similar to doing the wave reflections, where I'm just building larger shapes out of smaller shapes. I just put several brush strokes together to get some natural looking patch of space in between the strands of foam. Just putting lots of little shapes together. And I am going to come back with that foam color again to maybe add in some more little strands. Now maybe I can go back and put a little more of those littler foam shapes in and make this feel a little bit more random, a little more scrambled up. You do see those oval shapes, so you know, I'll try to make the edges maybe just a little bit rougher. And that was just some white mixed with my reflection color. And I think I'm completely sticking with horizontal brush strokes to build these little shapes. I think that eyes are real sensitive to tiny shapes that are in repetition, so that it makes like a texture. And if I have a lot of points that are going up or down, so like a triangle, you know, literally just a shape on here that is like a triangle that goes up or down, then that's immediately interpreted as three-dimensional objects that are pointed. It doesn't feel like this foam texture that's in perspective. So I really want to identify any shapes that look like a point that's going up or down, any little triangle shapes. So I've been looking for those too. You know, like, this seems ridiculous pointing this out, but you know, things like this might be one of those. A shape like this, see, here's a little point that's going down. It's the tiniest thing, but you know, it goes down this way and it doesn't really look like a strand connecting to another one, so that's an unnatural shape. Now it's hard to go through and find things that are that subtle, that small, but maybe there's more that are more obvious. You know, here's one up on the edge that it's just kind of a straight geometric point going upward. So zigzagging it a little bit might be a good way to make that one feel more natural. See, here's a little point. Again, I think it must seem ridiculous, but I just think that there's enough of those really are things that are detected and kind of interfere with the look of it, just resting and floating around on that water. Maybe some of these close areas I'll just kind of layer a little bit of that foam color over it, so that it seems like maybe it's just barely starting to break apart. There's still some foam under there. Still think that I maybe did more than I wanted to. I'm gonna go back to my negative space. I need to be a little bit more liberal with what I'm painting over, because I want to see less. I'm just You know, like I'm so afraid to get rid of the good shapes, or at least the things that I think are good shapes. It's such a funny tendency. I think everybody maybe has that, you know, just the fear of painting over progress. Now in here, I'm going to do more of that, just fogging that color right over this. It's going to be a lot more transparent when it dries. When it's wet, it looks like it's a lot more white. And then I'm going to try to maybe take some of these background shapes and level them out. You know, they've got a lot of movement like this. Being further back, maybe I want them to be just a little more horizontal. So kind of a funny looking shape. I brought the bends of it way out to make it look like it was more flattened by the perspective. Go with the shape that's already there, but just make the zigzag more extreme. All right, at this point, I think I've got a pretty good balance going of shapes, you know, negative space and positive space. I'm liking the way it's looking. In other words, there's no real scientific method that I have to say that I've arrived at the right spot. Just I'm starting to like the balance that I see, you know, how much it's breaking apart and how much stretched out horizontal shape there is compared to stretched out vertical shape. I'm comparing those two things, seeing that the perspective looks this way and not this way. So I'm starting to like that. So the next thing is to put little shadows under that foam. So to do that, I'm just going to add a little bit of black to the existing color. So I'll be using my sand color. You know what, I'm just going to add some of so I have these two colors I've been mixing to get that. Well, since every single bit of this has both colors, I'm just going to take some of this. This is my deep watercolor that's up in here, and I'm going to just mix that into the sand color right here in my little pot. And then it's simpler for me, then I'll just add a little bit of black to that to get my shadow. I don't want red colored shadows, and I know, you know, because of my earlier sand color that it looked kind of reddish brown, and if I just add black I might get that color again. So I want to be sure that I have my watercolor mixed in there. See, then just a touch of this. That's way too much black, I don't want that. Black's a pretty powerful pigment, so I'll start with just a tiny bit on the end of the brush and gradually add it in there. I don't need a lot of paint, just a tiny bit. Okay, I'll do a little test now. See what this looks like. If it's a match, I put that on and the darkness looked the same, so I know that it's going to dry darker. But I'm thinking maybe I want it just a little bit more, and maybe just a little bit bluer. That might still not be enough. It's enough for the foreground where it starts fading away. In the background, maybe I'll mix a darker color for that. So I'll go to the front here. All I'm doing is just trying to duplicate my foam just right underneath it. Just put in a shadow right under my foam. Just definitely want the fine point of my brush for this. This kind of helps to clean up my shape simultaneously too. It just further straightens out some of my edges on this. Makes my shapes look a little bit smoother as I go along and try to make that thin line right under each shape. I think I'll go a little bit fatter on the shadow, make the water look just slightly deeper. Drop these shadows down just a little bit more. This does indicate the depth of the water right here, but the the distortion effect on the water, it really, you know how it shortens somebody's legs when they're standing out there, so it brings these shadows up too for the same reason. And so I don't want to go too far down with it. Then the further out I get, I'll actually scrunch them more, even though the water gets deeper, because that distortion effect is so extreme. I want to just break this apart a little bit more in here, just see what it looks like. It just seems like such a sudden cut off where there's just this band of that foam. I'm gonna put that in there. This is the same shadow color that I'm using, but then what I'm gonna do is put some of this foam in there and maybe blend it a little bit so that it looks like, because this water is really getting churned up, it hasn't had time to really separate into those strands, so I'm just curious if it'll look good if I kind of mix these two things together and just leave patches of the two colors. Just find out, I haven't done it this way before. And I'll just put some foam kind of shooting out off the top of it, just blending it, blending the edges into that, and then maybe stretching them across the top a little bit. Just staying away from the more sharp edges. Yeah, but you know, I'm a real trial and error painter, so it's definitely worth all the times that my experiments have made things look worse to discover that one little trick that made it look better. I mean, that's such a good feeling. Let's put a shadow under this guy. See, this edge is a little bit messy, but when I put that shadow under it, it'll clean it right up. Boy, I'm telling you, we're just splitting hairs on shades of gray, but it's the difference between fitting and not fitting where I'm putting it. So those tiny differences are worth getting right. If it's too dark, it'll just look out of place. It won't look like the shadow that I want it to look like. Let me try this one. I added the white and the blue to it. Hopefully it's just a little bit lighter than that. I think that will fit in a little bit better. I'd rather not have that shadow than have it be too dark. Now I've run out of my batch colors that I mixed, so I'm doing little you know, enhancements on this, doing the same stuff that I did before, but mixing with my primaries now. So here's that phthalo blue and violet. Gonna mix it with my white. And then I wanted a little bit of green in there. I had green in my mix to get that shadow color. You start getting a different look when you work with primaries. You get little nuances, real subtle differences of color that might look like something's happening in there. Different shadow, a different highlight, just real subtle. You get a whole lot of that happening by accident. Now I just noticed that I don't have any strands of foam going across the faces of my waves. I think because my process was to stretch it out more horizontally when it hit the back side of the wave. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Since my process was to stretch my shapes out more horizontally, where it was coming across the back of a wave, that's the only place where I did. And you know, I need to make it look like it's more evenly stretched across the whole surface. Maybe it's not like the most necessary thing ever, but I'm not going to be able to live with it like that, just being across the tops of the waves. It's just kind of an unnatural pattern to my eyes. See, what I'm doing is not just putting them in the empty spot. I'm looking for spots that are already kind of dense where I can add more in, so that I don't make it even more even than it already is. It's kind of, you know, kind of evenly distributed. And I want to stay away from that. Notice that I'm, for the most part, working in diagonal lines. I want this water to look like it's flowing that way. I still want to see less of this foam. So I'm just going to take some pieces of it out. Okay, so now when I want to put foam on a curling wave like this, kind of like how I did down here, I need to think about it a little differently because the scale is large. I'm looking at a lot of water from a distance, not a little bit of water from close up. So the shapes are not going to be as rounded because on a large scale like that, it's not the same effect of maybe the surface tension making these all into little more circular shapes as much. I'm going to have longer strands of it pulling apart and big differences. It's not going to be even. It's not that it couldn't be, it's just that I think that it'll look more natural if I have maybe one or two areas that have a larger patch of foam that's swirling, getting stretched up along the curl. So that's what I'm going to do. When I do the lower part of the wave, I'll add white to it. When I do, and I'm adding white to the reflection color. That's all I'm doing because I consider that foam to be just the water with a lot of reflection on it. The lower part of the wave will have white added. The upper part I'll use blue for the shadow rather than black because that black will just make a brown color that looks out of place. So I'll use blue to shadow this part that's hanging over. I'll use white to highlight the part that's on this, which is what I did down here. I added white to my reflection color. And then I'll just try to make it define the shape of the wave. That's another advantage to putting foam on my wave. It helps to actually draw the shape of the wave if it's not already obvious. Alright, so here I go. I've got, on this palette, I've still got a little bit of white left, so I can use that for, oh yeah, I have white and blue on here. I have my colors. So like I said, I'll do a mix that has white in it. And that'll be for the base of the wave that's facing upward. So a shape that's going up and around this curl. So I'm just going to make a shape like that, just one little stroke of the brush, and then maybe I'll make more than one little point coming off of it and wrapping around. This is an advantage to having this brush, that I have that longer, nice sharp point so that I can draw these shapes. That's a little harder to do with the square brush that I also use a lot, but this one's better for these water techniques, I think. Okay, so I'm just drawing a real skinny line with that longest point of the brush, and there's water in this mix to help it to flow out of the brush better. You know, if you try to do that and it doesn't transfer onto the surface, then try adding water. You can also add extenders, you know, that are made for that, for extending the flowability of acrylic paint. Okay, so all I'm doing here is trying to stick with the same idea of You can see I left the tiniest little kind of oval shape in between. Here I'm making 2 points come out, and if I make points coming off my shape that are rounded in between, a round shape in between the points, then it creates that look of those ovalish shaped pockets of negative space in there. Now when I get down here to the base of the wave, this is where shape really matters. I want to be careful that I don't redefine the shape of my wave as something else. So I'm curving this down. It's like the letter C but tilted to the left, because that's the shape these, you know, it's usually not a perfect circle curl on these waves. It's usually kind of a circle that's squished, you know, kind of flattened so that it's maybe an oval shape going this way. So that's why I'm doing the shape that I'm doing here. So a strand, I'm not going to do the top, that's where I'm going to add blue. So that was a mistake right there. All right, I'm going to do another shape. I'm going to try not to do the exact same shape. I want these to be kind of stretched out. I want them to look like they're getting pulled and stretched up the face of that wave. So, you know, and that's a good thing to talk about. Wherever I have these, wherever I'm going vertically, I'm going to make it skinny because it's getting stretched, you know, like a piece of bubble gum. But, you know, then wherever I have space going this way, like this one, you know, I've got fatter shapes for anything going left to right. So let's just bring this down, maybe connect those together. That's kind of getting underneath that curl there, so maybe I'll use the more shadowed color on that one. So now I'm getting a little bit more creative, thinking, well, what if, you know, I'm just trying that out. What if I just made a shape go this way? Notice I made it fatter when it went sideways. I'll make it kind of stretch up this way, go like that. Dab it with my finger, maybe to lighten it, make it more transparent. I don't know. But in the end, I'm kind of doing it by feel, and I'm just looking for if it helps to, if it goes along with the shape of my wave. If it starts looking kind of weird, like it's redefining the shape as something I don't want it to be, then I might get rid of that spot. Now I'm just going to end up going over that with the blue because it's way up high. I just wanted to visualize the shape, so I just painted it in. You see, so I've got several lines that are kind of going this way now, and that's bothering me, looking like it's kind of making the shape of the wave look funny. So I'm going to try to change the direction of some of those. Now I gotta be careful. I don't want to do what I've been talking about all this time and fill it. This is real good to have that empty spot right in there. I don't want to fill that in because this is my full spot. This is my empty spot. I don't want to make everything even Steven here. Kind of thinking I could use a little bit of that bright color right in here. We'll make a dense area of that foam. And notice that when I get down here, I mean, I'm really flattening out the lines. I don't want to do anything that's not going with the direction of the water. All right, now let's add a little bit of blue to it. I don't want to add blue and white. I want to go back to my original foam color, so I'll do it over here and then add some blue to it to get a shadow. Just a little bit, I think will do. All right, so then here, I'm going to put it on this spot that's up on the top. I'm just going over that one that I said. I just wanted to see the shape, so I drew it out with the lighter color. But now I'm gonna paint over it with the darker color now that I know that I like that shape. And then I'll kind of dab it right here in the middle so that I'll have the two layers blending together a little more softly. It's a little bit too much of the same thing. Let's put a big old chunk of it right there. See, and in here it's curling again, so I'll take my shapes and scrunch them this way more. Do this shape in the middle. This is just about getting the value of it to be good looking. Okay, I'll do more in here, coming around this bend. Now that color is going to kind of blend right into this white water because it's made from the same paint, so it'll blend right into the shadow of this. See, I'm being real careful to keep these shapes moving right along the curve of this wave. It's definitely a balancing act, because if I do too many going exactly along the curve of the wave, it's not going to look natural. So I want to put just enough to make it look like it's following it. See, like this one, I went the other way just to break things up, make it feel a little more random. So it is trial and error. I don't have an exact scientific way of figuring out how much to make it be in that exact tilted C shape. Versus other directions, you know. Put that in right there. And that right there might be a little bit more tilt than I want. You know, I'm kind of wondering if I want to put my lines a little bit more vertically. Make it look like this wave is facing a little more toward me. You know, the more I swoop them this way, obviously the more it's going to look like it's moving side to side. So if I have less lines that are going that way and more going straight up and down, that it'll turn that wave to come straight toward me. Back in the light color now. I'm going to put a little bit more down in here. I think it'll look good to kind of level out my patch of foam here. You know, like I said, I don't want everything in that curved shape. I mean, I could. I just thought it would look good to bring it a little bit more toward me. See, by making lines that are less, just like with that one, less like this, more just level, that'll bring the perspective more facing right toward me, rather than curling over to that right side. All I'm doing is just making little horizontal lines till I feel like I've closed in the amount of space that I want to have my effect of a little bit of foam on this water. Now, a lot of the time, if you go, you know, you can see the lightest spots on this wave are light enough that it actually reverses. The foam is now darker than the water rather than lighter than the water, because it's the lightest part of this glowing wave. So that can be a cool effect. I don't have that effect so much on this one, but you know, that's something you can definitely try to make the light coming out from behind that foam. You use this shadowed version of that foam color, then brighten up this wave. and it looks like it's really glowing when you do that. We'll see if I'm gonna continue with this and then see if I want to have that effect or not. Now the level of my wave kind of got risen up a little more than I want it to, so I'm gonna do just like I did down at the bottom with all of the foam in the foreground. I'm gonna paint some of the negative space in here to just to kind of get back some of the base of my wave here, because I like that darker color where it curls up. Between the reflection and the foam that I put on there, I just kind of lost some of it. So that happens, and I just, we'll go back and forth painting the negative space in between. So to do that one now, since that's, you know, kind of a combination between the dark underwater and the reflection, I'm mixing those two. So right here I've got reflection in the deep water color, and I'll just come in here and put some little patches in. And that color looks real light and turquoise now, but it's going to dry darker. I'm going to take a little bit of white and green and try to kind of match those colors as it goes further up onto the face of the wave. See here, I have more of that green in there. So I can always come back and do more of anything. You know, I have these kind of systems in place. I'm not really guessing my way through this picture. So I like to be able to go back and forth and mess with my painting until it's where I think it looks good, you know. But a lot of it's still trial and error. It's just that there's a method. There's a method to the trial and error. I'll just put a few little tilting strokes of, just like I did my reflection earlier on that bending part of the wave, just so it doesn't look so starkly different than the rest of the stuff around it. It kind of ties it in. This is the process for me, is just back and forth, trying to understand the shapes that the foam makes, trying to understand the negative space that's in between the foam. And in this case, I'm just messing with it till I like the look of it. See, I think those shapes coming down further helped my curl to look bigger. Let's put a few little dots of deeper watercolor in here. I just saw kind of a solid stripe of the light color there. I thought it would look good to break it apart. Now I'll go ahead and I'll add some of that brighter green I was talking about. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it, but it seems like whenever I say, oh, maybe I'll do that, then that pretty much means I'm going to do it. When it comes to painting, not in everyday life. It's kind of the opposite in everyday life. So I've got a color here that's lighter. I'm trying to very carefully mix a lot of green and white in here to a level that is going to be just barely lighter than this foam here. I'll go all the way up and slightly overlap the edge of that foam. If I do this effect, I don't want to leave a dark outline around the foam, so that's why I say I'm going all the way up and slightly overlapping. And I just used my finger there to blend it. That's easier than trying to mix another color and blending it when I'm doing such a small spot on the picture. It gets darker as it goes down on the wave, and it gets darker as it curls over on the wave, so it's just this one spot toward the middle. And I don't want to put a bunch of light underneath this curl because there's all that overhang shadowing it. I'm using a little bit of my deep watercolor to blend this little gradient where it goes into the darker overhang, trying to get it nice and soft. Nice soft blend so that it looks like it gradually flips over there. Try to blend this top area a little bit. You can see just how much it darkens when it dries. If I'm just doing a thin layer, I hardly even need to do any blending at all. It just fades out. Definitely adds depth to the wave too. Makes that curdle come over. All right, I better do this side now over here on the right. I'll put some reflection color. Now this is just the reflection color all by itself. Without any white or blue added. So where I go up high, I'll add blue. Where I go down low, I'll add white. So I'm going to go up first. I'm going to try to be a little more strategic here and not cover up my darker areas of water. I didn't like how I had no darker water at the base of my wave on that left side. So this time I'm going to try to stay off of the areas that already have that. Maintain the shape of my water. The shape of my wave. Maintain the shape of my wave so that the base comes down far enough still. I feel like that's all it needs, is just one little spot where you can see the foam through, where you can see it getting backlit, where the wave is brighter than the foam. Just one area like that really adds a pretty little accent, and if I do it everywhere, I don't think it would be an accent anymore. So I'm just working on this spot to get it looking nice, and then I'll try to just subtly blend into the rest of the wave, just to have it look blended and finished. But I don't want to just go and put this effect everywhere now, because I'm realizing how good it looks just in that one spot. I'm just having fun with this. Just messing with the shapes back and forth. I want to take some of this darker foam color where I added the blue to it and go over some of my bright white spots that are right up under this wave, so that I get a little more of a shadow under it. So all I'm doing is just cutting off the top edge of the reflection so that the reflection maybe comes this high instead of this high. Just a slight adjustment in order to maybe get it to look like there's a little more wave underneath that. Or to make it look like it's reflecting this, because the water would reflect the shadow of this foam as much as the bright white part. So it just looked like it was a little bit close to me.